We're about to look into the pages of the first continuous recorded history of mankind in the book we call the Holy Bible. We're going to investigate some of its most controversial stories and discover the answers to some very tough questions. Is the Bible a reliable account of miraculous interventions that rescue people from sudden doom and destruction? Or is it merely a collection of legends and myths, as some modern-day critics claim? Leading experts, both Bible skeptics and proponents from throughout the world, have contributed to the discussion of these biblical questions that may shock and surprise you. High on a mountaintop in eastern Turkey, hidden beneath an icy glacier, is an important link to our distant past. Reports say it's a 5,000-year-old wooden ship with stalls and cages on board. From actual eyewitnesses, you will discover for the first time the real truth behind the age-old legend of Noah's Ark. You will witness never-before-seen aerial photos and satellite images that provide amazing new proof about the mystery that lies high atop Mount Ararat. You will hear fascinating eyewitness accounts from people who themselves have seen and photographed the ancient ship. This program will give us exciting information to shed light on these questions that have puzzled historians and scientists for thousands of years. Could the ancient legends be true? Is this Noah's Ark? Was there a worldwide flood that covered the entire earth, as the Bible claims? And what would it have been like for Noah and his family to face the greatest catastrophe the world has ever known?
Did a great worldwide deluge really occur? If so, where did the water come from? Where did it go?
Assuming that the fossil record of plants and animals can possibly prove that there was a global flood which destroyed mankind in Noah's day, isn't it logical to assume that there would be human artifacts in the sedimentary layers or the coal deposits representing this pre-flood civilization? If we can't find such artifacts, then essentially the story of Noah's flood is pure fiction. Where is the evidence for these human artifacts?
Our search for the Ark of Noah is not meant to be a religious mission. Above all, this is an archaeological quest to determine if this ancient mystery is truth or fable. Ultimately, our quest is to find the Ark itself. The Ark is probably the best known and most debated religious artifact in the world. Ark researchers and scholars have raised many serious and controversial questions about its possible discovery. Are the reported sightings of the Ark on Mount Ararat in Turkey the delusions of religious fanatics? Are they perhaps just innocently mistaken eyewitness reports? If so, how can we account for the ancient wood and artifacts found high on this treeless mountain? For many years, we thought the ultimate answers to these questions were lost to the ages. But now, modern scientific technology and new archaeological explorations are beginning to unravel many of the long-forgotten secrets of the Noah story. Some people contend that the story of Noah's global flood, along with much of the Bible, is nothing more than ancient legend with little basis and truth. But when scientists and linguists have gone digging for facts, some surprising findings have turned up. Charles Berlitz, author of numerous books, including The Lost Ship of Noah, is a renowned linguist and has studied the Noah flood account in detail.
The story of Noah and the flood are practically identical in all different sorts of ancient languages, whether it's Persian, Babylonian, ancient Egyptian, Chinese, Sanskrit. The only thing that changes occasionally is the name of Noah. Not only does it appear in the Christian Bible, but also in the Quran, the Bible of Islam. There it tells the story of Noah, or Nuh in Arabic, who escapes the flood in an ark with his family.
These accounts certainly help support the Noah legend, but is there any archaeological evidence to back up these stories?
The flood account is found on Babylonian, Akkadian, and Sumerian cuneiform tablets, which are now found in the British Museum. These date back to about 700 BC, but there are older accounts of the flood found in individual Chinese characters. Now, these Chinese characters really date back a long time. And we find the most ancient forms of Chinese character in bronzeware vessels. These are ceremonial vessels, and the writing is found inscribed inside of the vessels. And it is, the writing is taken the name of bronzeware writing. Now, these bronzeware vessels date back to the Shang Dynasty, about 1700 BC, only within 600 years after the flood.
A study of universal flood traditions reveals that there are over 200 accounts. These traditions are also found to be worldwide in their distribution and have many common elements.
So, the naysayers to the contrary, we do find historical evidence of both Noah and the flood. 272 mentionings, to be exact, in every civilization and culture around the world, including the Aztec and Inca cultures the Spanish found in the New World. Despite all the ancient accounts and reported sightings, most people, over the years, felt that the Ark story was just an old legend. Part of the problem was that there was only one widely known written account of Noah's Ark, the Holy Bible. The credibility of the biblical story of Noah got a big boost from an unlikely source in a most accidental fashion, from this man. In the mid-1800s, George Smith, an engraver by trade, used to spend his lunch hours in the British Museum.
I was not a trained archaeologist, but I had an endless fascination for things of an historical nature. My special interest was with artifacts of ancient Assyria. Though I'd never been to that part of the world, I'd read extensively everything available on Middle Eastern cultures and was utterly captivated by the subject.
As a frequent visitor, Smith had struck up a friendship with the museum director, who was impressed by the man's intelligence and enthusiasm. Smith was offered a special job. Someone was needed to piece together some of the 25,000 clay cuneiform tablets unearthed in the ancient city of Nineveh, dating back to the 6th century BC.
The next 10 years of my life were spent putting together these ancient clay tablets, but it was more than a complicated jigsaw puzzle. The inscriptions I translated from those tablets had a profound effect on the world of archaeology.
In 1872, after a decade of work, Smith came upon an account of a ship surviving a great flood and its coming to rest on a mountain, of a dove being sent out and not finding a place to land. The story told on these tablets, known as the Gilgamesh Epic, paralleled exactly the story of Noah in the Bible, suggesting the biblical account is far more than a fictional legend. George Smith's startling findings stirred great scientific curiosity and rekindled enormous public interest about the Ark and its possible discovery. According to the Bible, no one believed Noah and his warning of a great flood. So when it all began, the spectators, who were so busy ridiculing Noah and his family, showed little concern when the rain started falling. The downpour was far beyond anything they could have imagined. Their scorn was forgotten as their concern turned to fear. Even among the 8 on board, uncertainty was growing. Because of the sort of man he was, Noah's heart went out to them. But he knew he had no choice but to follow God's commands. It stayed dark and overcast during the long storm, so the first appearance of sunlight was a revelation.
The sun! Everyone come quickly! Do you see?
Sunlight. It's time to open the hatch. At long last.
So can we leave the Ark soon?
Not yet, I'm afraid. The Lord will reveal his true plan for us in due time.
In fact, they would continue to be afloat aboard the Ark for another 7 months. There were only 8 human passengers aboard the Ark, yet there were several thousand animals to feed and attend to during those many months at sea. It seems like a nearly impossible task. Could it have been done?
In the Ark, we would expect that there would be a lot of darkness, mainly due to the storm above. Under these conditions, the animals on the Ark would probably feed less, sleep more, and in many cases, we would expect that they would be in hibernation. Combine this quieting with lack of feed, sleeping, darkness, all of this would go together so that the family of Noah would be more than adequate to care for the animals for even up to a year.
In Genesis, we read that the waters prevailed upwards, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. Flooding is a natural phenomenon of nature. Few parts of the world are free from its savage effects. But the biblical account of the Noah flood tells of a great worldwide disaster, a global deluge requiring billions upon billions of cubic feet of water. Can we find any proof at all that it really happened?
Floods, both great and small, are an integral part of this planet's nature. There are many indications of floods in antiquity, but I personally would question one single massive flooding that covered the entire Earth in water for 150 days.
There's an extensive amount of evidence for a global universal flood catastrophe, and I see most of that evidence in the fossil record. Worldwide, fossils of animals and fish have been found buried in swimming positions suddenly and catastrophically, preserved in a moment of time. Among the most fascinating fossil finds which show animals in swimming positions include rhinos, hippos, and zebras buried in volcanic ash in Nebraska. And in Scotland, tons of fish have been found in positions of terror, fins extended and eyes bulging. Another fossil graveyard, this one in Geiseltal, Germany, shows a mixture of plants and insects from all climatic zones. When these kinds of fossils are found together, this is usually indicative of global flooding and rapid burial.
In any global flood which destroyed all mankind, you'd certainly expect to find some artifacts from Noah's pre-flood civilization. So then, what does the fossil record show? Have any pre-flood human artifacts ever been found? The answer seems to be yes. This iron pot, now on display at an Arkansas museum, was found encased in a piece of coal at the Thomas, Oklahoma Municipal Electric Power Plant in 1912.
I found this bell in a lump of coal when I was a young person firing a furnace in West Virginia. I dropped a large lump of coal, and when it broke, there was something sticking out of it. In the next few months, I abstracted this bell. The bell is approximately 7 inches, has a pagan god on top, and has an iron clapper, and the bell works very well. And over the period of time, we found out that it is made of both brass and bronze, plus arsenic, sodium, and antimony. which are not found in alloys that we have in the United States today. Historically, this pagan ceremonial bell is described very well by the account in Genesis found in 4:22 that says that Tubal-Cain was an artificer of brass and iron. And so this quite likely is a pre-flood civilization object and could have been carried over by Noah's flood into the coal.
This ancient man-made hammer was originally found in June 1934 in central Texas near the Llano Uplift. I took this artifact to Battelle Lab in Columbus, Ohio, the same lab that analyzed the moonstones. The elemental analysis shows that it is 96.6% iron, 0.74% sulfur, and 2.6% chlorine. Physicists tell us that under atmospheric conditions today, you cannot compound chlorine with metallic iron, yet here it is. Research indications are that the pre-flood atmosphere is the only plausible explanation for the forging of this metallic composition. Due to the pre-flood conditions of Noah's day, this hammer was forged in the generation of Tubal-Cain and Noah and deposited in the worldwide flood of Noah's day.
And what about Mount Ararat itself, where the Bible claims the ark went aground? If it had been submerged under the water, as the Bible says all mountaintops were, can we see any evidence that this actually happened?
I've noticed two things in particular on Mount Ararat from a geologic point of view that indicates that this 17,000-foot volcanic mountain was once underwater. First is the occurrence high on Mount Ararat of what is called pillow lava. Pillow lava is a unique formation that occurs when molten lava emerges from the earth below water. This alone indicates that the mountain was at one time underwater. Secondly, we have found salt crystals on Mount Ararat which could only be formed underwater. These salt crystals were found at the 14,000-foot elevation, indicating that, at least up to the permanent ice and snow line, that this mountain was underwater at one point.
And so the evidence mounts, indicating that yes, there likely was indeed massive worldwide flooding. It appears more and more that the events surrounding the biblical story of Noah may in fact be true. The devastating worldwide flood of Noah, along with the legendary 40 days and 40 nights of rain, is one of the Bible's most enduring and dramatic stories. But to accept this story of the flood as truth, we're faced with some very tough questions. All that water, where did it come from? How did it rise up and cover all the land masses? And after the flood, where did it go? Remember, we're not talking about a little bit of water here. The Bible says it was enough to cover the tallest mountain peak by 20 feet.
The first chapter of Genesis specifically describes a firmament or atmosphere which God created around the earth. In describing the waters above the firmament, Scripture suggests that in the time before the flood, there was a canopy of water vapor around the earth, much like thick clouds of rain, which helped to moderate the earth and protect its climate.
The idea of a water vapor layer or canopy surrounding the earth sounds somewhat bizarre, but actually canopies are quite common among the planets of our solar system. Venus and Jupiter and Saturn all have cloud canopies and thick gaseous envelopes surrounding them.
If the Earth had such a canopy, how much rain could it have produced? Enough for a worldwide flood?
The vapor canopy would have precipitated at most 40 feet of water directly. In addition, water released by volcanic eruptions during the flood would have kept heavy rain falling for 40 days and nights, becoming lighter as our present-day weather regime came into existence.
Our experts have indicated that the Great Deluge started and the water came from three sources. The subterranean fountains bursting forth, rain coming from the canopy above, and waters from the existing oceans spilling over the land. But what would have sparked this series of incredible events? One prominent theory suggests we look for an answer beyond the heavens.
It's clear from observations of the moons and planets of the solar system that many of them have undergone periods of heavy meteor bombardment. Even on the Earth, with its higher erosion rates, over 100 ancient impact sites have been discovered. It is certainly plausible that one of these resulted in a series of cataclysmic events leading to the Great Deluge.
As the specific cause of the flooding and the violent earthly upheavals, the meteor theory ranks among the most plausible. To explore the subject further, we turn to the retired director of one of the Defense Department's major research and development laboratories, Dr. Walter Brown.
We can see on our planet 17 very strange features which can now be systematically explained as a result of a cataclysmic global flood whose waters erupted from subterranean chambers with an energy release exceeding the explosion of 10 billion hydrogen bombs. This explanation shows us just how rapidly major mountains formed. It explains the coal and oil deposits, the rapid continental drift, why on the ocean floor there are huge trenches and hundreds of canyons and volcanoes. It explains the formation of the layered strata and most of the fossils, the frozen mammoths, the so-called ice ages, and major land canyons, especially the Grand Canyon. The pre-flood Earth probably had only one very large supercontinent covered with lush vegetation. There were seas and major rivers. The mountains were smaller than today's, but perhaps 9,000 feet high. According to the hydroplate theory, the pre-flood Earth had a lot of subterranean water, about half of what is now in our oceans. This water was contained in interconnected chambers, forming a thin spherical shell about half a mile thick, perhaps 10 miles below the Earth's surface. Increasing pressure in the subterranean water stretched the crust just as a balloon stretches when the pressure inside increases. Failure in the crust began with a microscopic crack which grew in both directions at about 3 miles per second. The crack, following the path of least resistance, encircled the globe in about 2 hours. As the crack raced around the Earth, the overlying rock crust opened up like a rip in a tightly stretched cloth. The subterranean water was under extreme pressure because of the weight of the 10 miles of rock pressing down on it. So the water exploded violently out of the rupture. All along this globe-encircling rupture, fountains of water jetted supersonically almost 20 miles into the atmosphere. The spray from this enormous fountain produced torrential rains, such as the Earth has never experienced before or after. The Bible states that all the fountains of the great deep burst open on one day, and it describes these events about 5,000 years ago, which we can now tie together scientifically. Some of the water jetting high above the cold stratosphere froze into supercooled ice crystals and produced some massive ice dumps, burying, suffocating, and instantly freezing many animals, including the frozen mammoths of Siberia and Alaska. The high-pressure fountains eroded the rock on both sides of the crack, producing huge volumes of sediments that settled out of this muddy water all over the Earth. These sediments trapped and buried plants and animals, forming the fossil record. This erosion widened the rupture. Eventually, the width was so great that the compressed rock beneath the subterranean chamber sprung upward, giving birth to the mid-oceanic ridge that wraps around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. The continental plates, the hydroplates, still with lubricating water beneath them, slid downhill away from the rising mid-Atlantic ridge. After the massive, slowly accelerating continental plates reached speeds of about 45 miles per hour, they ran into resistances, compressed, and buckled. The portions of the hydroplate that buckled down formed ocean trenches. Those that buckled upward formed mountains. This is why the major mountain chains are parallel to the oceanic ridges from which they slid. The hydroplates, in sliding away from the oceanic ridges, opened up very deep ocean basins into which the floodwaters retreated. On the continents, each bowl-shaped depression or basin was naturally left brimful of water, producing many post-flood lakes.
The demonstration you have just witnessed of a massive worldwide catastrophe in antiquity supports the biblical story of the deluge in every detail. During their long ordeal at sea, Noah and his family had their faith, but very few answers. How long would the floodwaters prevail? would they find land before running out of food for themselves and the animals?
If there's land out there, she'll find it.
First, Noah sent out a raven to see if there was dry land anywhere, but the raven just flew about, likely feeding on floating debris. Noah then sent a dove from the ark to search for dry land, which may have surfaced above the floodwaters. But the dove returned, having found no place to rest. Later, the dove was sent out again. This time, the dove returned, grasping an olive branch in its beak, indicating the floodwaters had receded. The ark was at sea for many long months, waiting for the storm to cease and the floodwaters to recede. At long last, it came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Now, 8 months after the flood began, other barren mountain peaks became visible. Noah and his family followed God's command and continued to stay aboard the ark for their safety and that of the animals. It was their only shelter and home. It was on the 10th month that Noah climbed to the highest reaches of the ark. There he opened the hatch, which allowed him to reach the roof of the great boat. He climbed onto the roof to be able to see in all directions from where the ark had come to rest. The barren landscape still showed the ravages of the devastating flood. It was to be nearly 60 more days before Noah felt it was safe enough to leave the ark. In all, Noah and his family were aboard the ark for 365 days. And the creatures of the earth were set free once again. Noah's trust in God's commands had been an enormous act of faith, but it was faith well rewarded. Noah and his family were the only humans to survive the great flood, and for Noah's faithfulness, the Lord promised never again to bring such destruction, and for the first time on earth, set a rainbow in the sky, sealing his promise to mankind. The account of Noah's flood was a moving and dramatic ordeal for Noah and his family. But can we find any scientific verification of when the flood occurred and any documentation regarding the bow in the sky?
All of the dates that are given in the Bible, especially those that are given by Noah, are based on the moon and the sun. We can, with astronomy and our knowledge of that today, go back and precisely duplicate what he saw in the sky. And when we do this, we find that Noah entered the ark on Sunday, May 14th, 2345 BC. Then, the biblical account tells us, Noah left the ark after he was on it 365 days. The second day after he was off of the ark, he built an altar, and a great bow occurred in the sky. As we examine the sky on that year, we find that there was a solar eclipse at sunup, an awesome, frightening phenomenon. A computer can actually show you what he saw in the sky on that particular day. I'd like to have you follow with me for a few moments as we duplicate the events that Noah saw. As you look at the screen, you'll see the horizon. In other words, anything below this line is below the horizon. Noah would not have seen it. Above the horizon would be what Noah would have seen. The large spot is the sun. We're progressing it to 4:54 in the morning. The sun is beginning to rise. 5:08, you notice how the sun is rising, and at the same time the moon is starting to blanket out. We move to 5:22, and you see how it's beginning to form an arc in the sky, a beautiful bow. So we move it to 5:30 in the morning, and we have a bow that's now beginning to disappear again. But this would have been much more spectacular because the sun bends the rays of light as it comes close to the horizon, so it would have been an awesome sight for Noah. Equally spectacular in the western sky, you would have seen A rainbow, perhaps. And there you have precisely on the computer what Noah saw on that particular day.
Even though the biblical global flood is still debated in scientific circles, a universal catastrophe best explains most of the Earth's physical features. Equally compelling are the human artifacts found in coal and sedimentary deposits, as well as the nearly 300 cultural flood accounts and the astronomical evidence, all of which agree and support the biblical flood account. This story is more than an account of a man, his family, and a zoo full of animals surviving a worldwide catastrophe in a big boat. It's an account of God's judgment on a world full of people who had gone their own way, and of God's merciful protection of the few who followed him. God still wants us to be faithful in following him. If he were having an ark built today, would you be working alongside Noah, or would you be one of the skeptics? Something to think about.